It sounded beastly, striking terror into the hearts of the Ascension Alliance warriors who heard it. But to Ryuk, it sounded more like a command. And true to his suspicions, he watched as the entire Null army began marching forward with speed toward Ryuk and his Technoforge army. For a second, Ryuk's eyes flashed with battle intent. "Techno guards, hold the line, 20 meters away," he ordered, and in the next instant, he watched as they immediately glitched forward toward the approaching Nulls but stopped once they reached 10 meters away, dropping to a knee side by side, and their upper arms flared with light which quickly began morphing mid-air. 3 seconds later, there was now a gigantic jade blue-colored shield, close to 20 meters high, standing before the Null army, who all rushed forward insanely. Bang! A powerful ripple of energy blasted out as the Null army collided with the huge barrier, and Ryuk watched the knees of the Technoforgers drag on the ground. But it was like they shared a joint energy with each other, making sure that not even those at the Dominion stage level were thrown back. Instead, it was like they all shared the same energy and also the attacks, stepping back at the same time. "This is good enough," Ryuk muttered, and in the next instant, he raised up his right arm and his will spread out, appearing before the shield barrier projected by the Technoforgers. His will tightly wrapped around it as he solidified space as hard as he could around the barrier. Bang! Ceaseless attacks continued to slam into the shield, but with Ryuk's ether wrapping around it tightly, they couldn't move the Technoforges an inch backward. The shield held firm. Interesting, Ryuk thought to himself. But behind him, the Ascension Alliance Guardians were reeling in shock. Ryuk, along with just about 13 of these armored warriors, were able to hold back the Nulls and stop them from ascending forth toward them, causing chaos. If this had been done at the beginning of their battle, they would have been able to avoid so much chaos. But it was too late, and they had clashed directly with the Nulls, resulting in mutual destruction. While everyone was reeling in shock and simply watching, a certain healer, covered in robes, brought out her communication device and began recording the event live to the world, unknown to all present. Ryuk's amusement was there, but he knew the barrier wouldn't hold forever if the Nulls kept slamming their attacks into it. So, in the next instant, he ordered, "Warforgers, go and kill all Nulls in sight." The first to step outward was Ascendant General Ablier, and following him were about 9 other Warforgers. Their numbers were low because Ryuk only brought those from the Dominion class upwards. The Ascension class were too weak for this battle and would just be killed needlessly, a waste of energy. So he might as well focus on those who might make an impact. Arriving behind the Technoguards, General Ablier's grimoire flared with light, and in the next instant, a gigantic sword appeared, which settled in his grasp. Surprisingly to Ryuk, he watched as grimoires also surrounded the remaining 9 Warforgers behind him, and various weapons began appearing in their hands before they stepped forward, glitching through the barrier, and then, boom! The sound of explosions and blood splashing was all that could be heard from behind the glimmering shield barrier. Ryuk turned his attention to a single glitched soldier who was still standing before him. It was in the shape of an ant, except that it stood on 2 feet like a human, covered in blue plates of armor. It was the only Neuroshade that Ryuk had summoned, and it was also the only one at the Cataclysm stage. "Drift Path Warden, show me the aerial view," Ryuk ordered, and the ant immediately opened up all 6 wings. With a single glitch, it was right in the air. As it moved into the distance, a second later, Ryuk's eyes flashed with a bizarre glitching light as the entire sight immediately became clear before him. He was sharing the vision of the Phantom Warden, and now he would see the situation. It wasn't very favorable. Apart from Ascendant General Abliver, the others were quickly getting destroyed, although they were also glitching back to life. But Ryuk didn't see that as a loss. He understood. All the Warforgers were just about 2 High Exarchs, that is, 2 Cataclysm stage experts and 7 Iron Strategians, which were the Dominion stage experts, against an entire 1,000-strong army of Nulls, who were at the least Dominion stage and majority at the Cataclysm stage. Then of course they would be destroyed. But he watched on silently from behind the shield, noting how the wars were fought. Quickly, he grasped a significant advantage of the Warforgers against the Null army, and that was that, while the Nulls flinched in pain when attacked, the glitched warriors seemed not to know pain. When they were pierced through, there was no blood at all, and they simply kept attacking. They feel no pain and they have no blood. They're just like machines, fighting and fighting with no sense of defeat until their power is exhausted. Unlike the Ascension Alliance warriors, they can never be weary due to tiredness or due to the nauseousness from so much blood being split. This is a significant advantage, Ryuk muttered to himself as he watched all of the Iron Strategians quickly taken down and destroyed, all returning back to the Techno-Void ruin. He could choose to reanimate them. They would be healed. But he chose not to do that. They would need some time to recover with the nanocore reactor before bringing themselves back to normal. The High Exarchs, along with Ascendant General Ablayer, continued the fight and lasted for 2 minutes before they were also destroyed, leaving just Ascendant General Ablayer, who continued killing dozens of the enemies with a single swing of his sword. No matter how hard they tried to gang up on him, Ascendant General Ablayer was simply too fast to be held down. He just kept gliding around, slashing and destroying as many as possible. But then, Ryuk's eyes flashed with light as he watched a being suddenly appear before Ascendant General Ablayer and cleave out with a single claw. Ascendant General Ablayer sensed the attack early on and slashed his sword toward the claws. But then, clang! Cracks easily meandered through the swords held by Ascendant General Ablayer, as the huge dark claw collided with it and it shattered into nothing a second later. Ascendant General Ablayer insanely punched out with his left fist, but a Null Wanderer appeared in the path of the fist, managing to block it, albeit being sent flying off like a ragdoll. This little opening was what all the Null King needed to instantly send its claw forward, slashing diagonally across Ascendant General Ablayer's chest as he was instantly nailed to the ground. The sound of red lightning rang out as the Null King raised its head up into the sky, conjuring a huge ball of energy before it arced downward toward Ascendant General Ablayer, and then, the energy wave blasted through him, as Ryuk watched it tear open a gigantic hole in the Ascendant General's torso, and a few seconds later, he disappeared into nothing but glitching energy, returning back to the Techno-Void ruin. All of the Techno-Void Warforgers had been destroyed, and now it left just the Techno-Guards still standing, their shields raised. But when Ryuk noticed the Null King that got rid of Ascendant General Ablayer walking toward the shield, he didn't need to be told. It would most likely tear through it with 3 attacks. And instead of wasting the energy, he recalled back all the Techno-Guards who instantly disappeared along with their shields. Gasps mixed in with shock and fear left the lips of the warriors who suddenly witnessed the shield that covered them and prevented the Nulls from coming in suddenly drawn back in. They unconsciously prepared themselves, most especially when they saw that being, cloaked in abyssal energy. It was a beast, a massive one whose height reached about 15 meters, and it walked on all fours. Its form was as bulky as a bear, yet as agile as a walking werewolf. Its right arm was twice as big and covered in sinister dark veins that pulsed with abyssal energy, the claws crashing into the ground and leaving a crater within. Its head was elongated like that of a horse, but there were lines over it, and occasionally it opened up like the petals of a predator flower, revealing the twisted maw within, with a bulk hole at its center that seemed to want to devour the world. Its aura was incredibly powerful, almost suffocating, as it suddenly exploded with dark energy that rapidly moved forward to swallow the army. But when they reached Ryuk, vroom! The air shook as an incredibly powerful aura burst out from him, golden blue in color, slamming against the coming dark energy and pushing it back. Ryuk's eyes looked at the approaching army of Nulls. There were about 1,000 of them, with about 3 Null Wanderers still alive, but the most eye-catching one was this gigantic beast. So this is what a Null King looks like, huh? Ryuk muttered to himself. To be honest, he expected something that was much more intelligent since it was a Null King, and intelligence could be defined as looking humanoid. But this Null King, it was unlike a humanoid at all, no different from a beast, and when it needed to roar to issue commands, Ryuk couldn't tell if it had that much intelligence at all. We're doomed. How is he going to face an army of Nulls all by himself? Especially the Null King. Even our most powerful Eternity-grade experts were struggling to get it back. This plan is shitty. They should have never left the battlefield to him. The various murmurs began ringing out once more, and most of them were just negative comments. But who could blame them? To watch an army of Nulls marching forward along with the gargantuan Null King, and having nothing but a single individual standing before them and their death. Of course, they would falter, and Ryuk didn't let that get to him. The only way to shut them up was simple: action. And finally, Ryuk finally made his first move. It was a simple act, spreading his arms forward as if he wanted to hug the approaching Nulls. But then golden blue energy appeared in his palms, and in the next instant, Ryuk rotated his hands. Immediately, the Ascension Alliance army witnessed the largest scale of telekinesis they would ever see in their lives. The entire battlefield ground where the Null army stood suddenly twisted on itself as the entire ground was sliced open like a cake in a circular format before tilting. An entire army of Nulls was, in an instant, buried under the ground. But he knew that wasn't enough. They can just crawl back out, so he began walking forward, and when he appeared before the smoothened battlefield, he raised up his foot and then, "Activate Draconic Grave March." Stop! The sound of heavy stomping that instantly sent the entire turned-over ground beneath Ryuk enveloped in an immense crack, and a second later, the army watched as from within those cracks, dark blood sprayed into the air like an opened floodgate, reaching halfway into the dark clouds, as silence descended the entire battlefield. The blood flowing out unendingly was the dark blood of Nulls. He buried them under the ground, and then squeezed them into blood showers with a stomp of his leg? An Ascended Alliance soldier asked in confusion, but the rest remained silent as they were just as clueless as he was and had no idea what was even happening. But suddenly, roar! An incredibly powerful roar resounded as a figure suddenly blew out from the ground, along with two others. Bang! The ground stirred into even more when they landed on it, as Ryuk refocused on the blood-covered figures. They were the Null King and two of the three Null Wanderers. The Ascension Alliance army waited for a few seconds, expecting more Nulls to burst out of the ground, but they watched in shock as nothing came out of the ground anymore. This is what is left? From about a 1,000 army of Nulls? Just 3 Nulls? The realization sent shock down their spine as disbelief filled them up. But Ryuk instead had his brows contorted. I thought that would be enough to kill all of the Null Wanderers and Null Walkers. But 2 of them survived along with the Null King. Is it intelligent enough to protect them? Ryuk's thoughts were immediately diverted when he noticed the 2 pseudo-eternal grade Nulls rushing forward toward him. Seconds later, the Null King moved, fading into shadows. Ho! Ryuk exhaled as he moved both necks sideways, cracking them before his hands clenched into a fist and he held them close to his chin. He had no weapon on him except for his gun, which wasn't the best, so he might as well do what he knew best. Close combat. The first Null to reach him was a fat humanoid monster holding a gigantic club that swung insanely downward toward Ryuk. Its shadow was enough to cover him completely. But then, Ryuk simply swerved to the side as the club crashed heavily into the ground. Slash! Immediately, claws slashed toward his head, but he dodged it at the last second by lowering himself down, before quickly running forward, climbing on top of the hefty club, and jumping up to appear on top of the first Null Wanderer. Instantly, his right leg stretched forward, covered in frost mana that formed sharp pointy ice crystals around them, and then, vroom! The air was blown into 2 as Ryuk sank his leg downward on top of the Null Wanderer, who tried to raise both hands to cover his face. But the instant the leg connected with the hands, activate Draconic Grave March. Immediately, the hands fell down, as if they suddenly weighed 1,000 tons, leaving the face exposed before Ryuk's feet, and it finally connected. The sound of the ice crystals piercing into the head resounded before. A moment later, the Null Wanderer's head burst into pieces and fell down with a giant thump, with Ryuk landing on its stomach. But quickly, he raised both hands, crossing them onto his chest, and instantly, the air was slashed into bits as a dark claw snaked through the void, slamming straight into Ryuk's crossed hands and sending him flying backward for 30 meters. His legs dug into the ground, carving open a large gorge on the ground from the force. But then, crack! Ryuk's neck made a harsh noise as he jerked his head, making them lie on his left shoulder. Yet still, a line of blood splashed by the side of his face. some of it reaching his right as he shut it closed. He exhaled immediately as the object, a long, sharp tongue, instantly withdrew itself back to its source, which was from a null wanderer seemingly no different from a toad, except with claws instead of webbed feet. Croak! The froggy sound echoed as Ryuk watched the null swell up into a ball, and then, kaboom! The ground beneath it gave way as it instantly exploded before Ryuk in a blink. But even with its incredible acceleration speed, Ryuk still saw it pretty quickly, as he braced himself, taking a single backward step to steady himself before throwing out a punch with his full power, targeting the toad's head. When the punch connected, the corner of his eye noticed the strange abyssal rune that appeared on the toad's neck, and his eyes flashed in shock. When his fist faintly connected with the toad, it was like the force of the attack had been doubled twice in power and proceeding to be sent back to Ryuk. His eyes flashed in realization, but instead of withdrawing his punch, he continued while ordering, "Activate Sovereign Rewriting." Immediately, the shape of the runic lines changed, turning into a complex runic diagram with various dots of light connected in an incredibly complex way. But he only needed to break a single bond off to instantly cause chaos in the formation, and then, kaboom! His punch connected to the toad's neck, and instantly, the back of the toad's skin swelled up like a balloon before it blew up with a loud bang, blown backward and slamming into the approaching Null King, both of them shooting backward for 20 meters before coming to a stop. Ah! A deep inhale left Ryuk's lips as he rose up from his punching stance and then looked at his hands. With furrowed eyes, he watched as cracks began meandering through the entire surface before his outer layer of skin shattered apart, revealing glittering nanobotic filaments within his arms. In the end, he had suffered from the toad's redirection rune, but still it was a worthy sacrifice as the Null Wanderer was now dead. Now there was just one foe left to deal with, the Null King, who rose up to his feet, its claws piercing into the toad's head and blasting it into paste as it took a step toward Ryuk. It began moving around Ryuk, its eyes flashing with an abyssal dark light, as Ryuk remained standing in the same position, not even in a battle stance, and immediately, the beast rushed forward from behind. Roar! A powerful roar escaped its lips as its huge claws cleaved through Ryuk, but then, it was only an afterimage. Gasps escaped the lips of the Ascension Alliance army as they found Ryuk standing above the beast 50 meters up in the air, and suddenly, "Activate Draconic Overdrive." Ryuk muttered as a powerful splinter of lightning rained down from the sky, slamming onto Ryuk and what was beneath him. The Null King's body lowered into the ground, but that wasn't all. A humongous leg smashed onto its head, instantly blowing it apart into nothing, as a powerful blue mist covered everything, blocking the scene. But when it finally settled, there, standing 100 centimeters away from the Null King, was none other than Ryuk, whose clothes had been blown to nothing, leaving just his trousers on him and the Null King. Its head had been flattened into the ground, reduced to nothing but a paste, as silence covered the area. Draconic Overdrive has been deactivated. The system notification flashed to Ryuk, who grinned devilishly. His plan had been simple: dodge the attacks of the Null King, appear above it, morph into his draconic form standing at a height of 50 meters, and borrow the massive weight to nail down the Null King's head, killing it with one swift stomp, and then quickly deactivate the technique before he could be seen in his draconic form. The plan had worked perfectly, and he had defeated the Null King in an instant. And calmly, Ryuk turned his gaze back to the Ascension Alliance army, who all remained quiet, shocked to their core, before a roar of joy burst out so loud, Ryuk felt his eardrum almost splinter. The Kaanul King is dead. All the Nulls have been killed. We have won the war. Yeah. The first thing Ryuk did after killing the Null King was get rid of the loosely hanging cloth on him, donning a simple shirt and trousers. He eyed the overexcited Ascended Alliance warriors, watching some collapse to their knees, bawling their eyes out while clapping as hard as they could. And Ryuk finally felt a bit of fire in him ignite from the victory as he raised his hand, clenching it into a fist. His simple action drew an even louder cheer before he floated up into the sky, soon becoming a light beam that shot into the distance. Only if he knew. It wasn't just a few thousand, but about 1 billion Enderathians cheering loudly for his simple action. The Null Kings, terrors that struck fear into the hearts of the masses, as they knew not even the gods of this world could easily take them down, had been defeated live before their eyes by a single individual. Even though they had no idea what race he was, since there was no horned race among Enderaths. His simple motion of raising up his hand and clenching it into a fist, a sign of victory, at last showed whose side he was on. The news picked it up, and the question was the same everywhere. Who is this horned savior that could defeat an entire army of Nulls, which Enderath's top powers, the Ascension Alliance, failed to defeat? He did it. He did it. Peak Wave Aster. Yes. The muffled roar of disbelief and joy was ringing in Astralakes's office, coming from none other than the man who stood behind Aster's seat. Both of John's hands were clenched into fists, veins bulging in them as he felt his pounding heart finally receding. The instant the live broadcast had begun, they had been able to instantly clock into it, and he had watched the entire footage with Aster. It had just been paused, as Aster looked at the last image on the footage. The image of Ryuk with his high-raised, clenched fist, before a deep exhale left her lips as she softly reclined on her seat, her heaving chest slowing down. He really did it. He ended the war in Zone A, without any more casualties suffered. Now, the only war is in Zone B, Aster said out loud as John calmed his excitement, his hand moving outwards and shifting the holographics. According to the information, the 4 Eternity-grade experts arrived just 2 minutes ago, and 5 of them are now locked in battle with the Null King, while 1 is working together with the Pseudo-Eternal and trying to defeat the Null Army. The last time we were able to get rid of the Null King with just 4 Eternals. If 5 of them are fighting together, then it's an overkill. It will take some time, but at most an hour from now they should succeed in that, he calculated. But suddenly, a voice rang out. "And what's that picture with a play icon on it?" the voice asked. John instantly snapped his eyes to the side, a pistol appearing swiftly in his hand as he pointed it at the intruder. "Who are you? You have 5 seconds to get," he was saying when he paused in his steps as he looked at the image of the horned individual on the footage and then back at Ryuk. 2 more turns of heads, and he didn't need to be told who was who. "Lower your gun, John. He's not an enemy. You, of all people, should know that at least," Aster said to him as John took his pistol back, watching as Ryuk moved closer to the footage. "Someone took a picture? Well, looks pretty cool. Talk about god-tier timing," he teased. But then Aster's hands stretched forward and she tapped the air as Ryuk watched the video start all over again, from the moment he began releasing the glitched warriors into the air. It's a video? Someone recorded everything?" he asked as the teasing smile on his face faded, and Aster nodded. "It's not just a video. It was a broadcast that started 30 minutes ago and only ended 6 minutes ago. About 4 billion people watched it live, and probably double that number will be seeing it before tomorrow morning's sun," she said, as Ryuk furrowed his gaze before he shrugged. "I would have loved for my actions not to have been videoed, but I guess there isn't much to be done about it. Hopefully, the Wee One doesn't turn into who is a greater threat, the Nulls or the horned monster," Ryuk voiced out as John's and Aster's expressions contorted, and Ryuk noticed that when he turned back to them. "What?" "Well, that's a way to think about it, you know. You look pretty far into the future," Aster said as Ryuk shrugged. "Trust me, it's possible," Ryuk replied, but in his thoughts he continued. "They're joyful now that the Null King has been defeated, but soon they'll be asking, if he can take down the Null King, then most likely he can take us all down, and then they'll be requesting for me to be taken down soon. Doesn't matter anyway," Ryuk said, waving it off, before his expression focused. "Tell me, how's the war happening in Grade B? Has the other Null King been taken down?" Ryuk asked, as Aster shook her head. "No. The other Eternity grade expert just arrived about a minute ago, according to our spy reports. But you don't have to worry. Last time we took down a Null King with only 4 Eternity grade experts. Now, 5 of them are gathered on one. They should be able to take it down with no problem. An hour at most, and they should be done. Once the Null King is defeated, the others can be rounded up easily. We've already won this war, Aster said, as Ryuk's eyes flashed. Is the war being live-streamed? Can I see what's happening? He asked, as she shook her head. No, that's impossible. The Eternity Grade experts have an artifact that will block any signal from live-streaming. It's not so beautifully we win the war, you know? Better for the people to know we won the war than to see how it was won, or see how their so-called undefeatable gods are being thrown to the ground by a monster. When the Eternity Grade experts left, the signals were opened, and you weren't wearing a live-stream blocking device. That's why they were able to video you. Silence reigned for a couple of seconds, but it didn't last, as Aster pressed down a button. One part of the floor opened up, and coming out were white-colored, comfy-looking sofas. Have a seat, Ryuk, she said, and Ryuk nodded. But he had yet to sit down when, suddenly, something appeared on the seat, making Ryuk pause his motion to look at the figure. It was a small kitten, dark-colored and eyeing the environment before it turned its gaze up to look at Ryuk's butt. Move it, Void, Ryuk said as Void scurried off. Ryuk finally took his seat, turning to Void, who rolled his eyes at him. You still have your Void cat pet with you? Astralaxia's eyes gleamed as she looked at Void, who turned to look at her, raising an eyebrow as Aster noticed a bit of light flash in its eyes. Well, hello, Beauty. Seems like you know me, though I don't know you. Beauty of fame, wouldn't you say? Void said, as everyone in the room turned their gaze to him. A talking cat? John said, as Void disappeared only to reappear on Aster's table, turning a side glance to John. Never seen one before, green-haired? He asked John, who confidently shook his head. I'm pretty sure cats don't talk. And I'm pretty sure it's just because they're all defective, Void replied snickeringly, and even Ryuk chuckled a bit at the humorous words. It was the first time he was seeing Void talk clearly, and it definitely had that sweet mouth. So, what's up, Beauty? Mind if I know the name? Void asked, arriving before Aster while stretching out its thumb for a shake. But then Aster's eyes narrowed as she looked into Void's eyes, and the image she could see was the image of her chest. That's weird. I didn't know Ryuk is the lecherous type, Aster said, turning to Ryuk, who shook his head. No, I'm not. He's not my kid. Must have gotten lecherous on his own, Ryuk replied as Void scoffed, looking at Ryuk, who looked elsewhere before he turned to look at Aster. Ah, lecherous. I feel deeply offended by such words. Beauty. Wouldn't you say my feelings are right, though? I'm not interested, little thing. Oh, don't say that. I'm anything but little that I can reassure you, Void said, smiling sheepishly. Aster rolled her eyes, but then turned to find Ryuk's eyes focused on the blank air before him, most likely deep in thought. Who is he, Peak Wave Aster? You seem to know him very well, John whispered to Astralaxia, who refocused her attention on the flashing footage. He's Ryuk, the Supreme Wave. The Supreme Wave? But that position has been vacant for so long now, I thought it was just a joke, John said as he turned back to look at Ryuk, exhaling a bit. The Starweave organization was a powerful organization, almost as powerful as the Ascended Alliance itself, and they had 5 hierarchies amongst them. Aster was a peak wave, the highest in position, and giving orders for the entire building. After her, there were about 5 more people, including him. They are referred to as top waves. But then, at the highest ranking was a mythic grade known as Supreme Wave. It was a vacant grade that was almost useless because Aster was the one who gave orders and she was the peak wave just below the Supreme Wave. Everyone new to the organization would always find themselves wondering why there was a vacant highest grade, especially since the one who built the organization was Astralaxia, who was the peak wave. But eventually, they forget it. But now hearing that this horned individual, who seemed more like a really young human, was the Supreme Wave, was something that shocked him speechless. But then, when the memories of the footage from before replayed in his head and he remembered how he had taken an entire army of nulls on his own, he wasn't that much surprised anymore. A being of that caliber of strength is more than worthy of being the Supreme Wave of the organization. But what's he doing, though? He seems as if he's in a little world of his own. And truly, to John, Ryuk was in a little world of his own. Congratulations, host, on completing the mission. Take revenge for having been treated like a lab rat by the Silvernock race. Rewards. Plus 10 level-up cards. Plus 700,000 EXP. Plus 20 ability upgrade cards. Congratulations, host, on completing the mission. Defeat a pseudo-null king. Rewards. Plus 6 level-up cards. Plus 500,000 EXP. Plus 50,000 purchase points. A pseudo-null king? Ryuk thought in his head as he looked again and again at the panel and saw the words pseudo-null king. So those things are not true null kings like everyone refers to them as. They are pseudo-null kings. I can guess that if they are pseudo-kings, then the one who controls them must be the real null king. And I think I already know who he is. Ryuk thought silently to himself as he remembered those dreams he used to have. The dream of that hooded null that sent fear down his spine. A nightmare that has haunted him ever since he could remember. He must be the true null king, and the one who possesses one of my body parts. Ryuk silently thought to himself, but then, the sound of beeping rang out through the place as Ryuk's attention was brought back, and he turned to look at the footages hanging before Aster. The war has been won. They've successfully defeated the Null King, Aster said, barely able to contain the relief in her voice. And there were no casualties to the Eternity Stage Expert too, John added, heaving in his heart. Endearth has finally been able to complete its 6th null invasion, he ended, as Ryuk's eyes flashed. 6th null invasion? He asked loudly in shock. I thought this should be the 3rd? He asked as Aster turned to look at John before ordering. Tell them that the organizations will be giving a week of holiday for the success. All of them are free to go back home and resume next week Monday, she said, as John's eyes flashed before he nodded. You Top Waves 2 can take your holidays too. If I need any of you, I'll call you up. Very well, Peak Wave Aster. I'll be reporting to them all now, he said, bowing slightly before walking towards the elevator and leaving the room. A lot has happened during your absence. Ryuk? Astralaxia said, clicking a button on her desk before she rose up to her feet, walking towards him. Ryuk looked at her but then turned his gaze beneath his feet, as he watched the ground dip inside before something appeared from within, just like how the sofas were made to appear. But they weren't sofas this time. Instead, what was there was a teleportation circle oozing with a green light that was present at the center of the room. Ryuk rose to his feet upon seeing the teleporter, and when he did, the sofa he was sitting on went back into the ground. And I don't think here's the best place to catch up on that. So what do you say we go to a more homely place, she asked as she climbed into the teleporter. You have a home? He asked as she rolled her eyes. Oh, please. Who doesn't? She replied sarcastically. But then, a dark figure soon also appeared on Ryuk's shoulder. Well, he definitely doesn't have a home, Void said, as Aster giggled and Ryuk turned his gaze to it, watching as the cat snickered, only to get tapped on the head. Hey, what was that for? Shut it, Void, Ryuk said as Void snickered at him. What you gonna do about it, kid? I'm the boss here, he said, almost trying to bootlick Aster, who rolled her eyes at it. You both are quite the duo. Trust me, he just started acting like that ever since we got back to Endearth. Something must have gotten into him. Hey! Immediately, dots of green light flared into the sky, and the trio disappeared from the room. The instant they were gone, the teleporter sank back into the ground, as the lights in the room slowly dimmed, leaving only dim lighting present around. How do you find it? The words echoed through the dimly lit room, close to an entire wall window where various skyscrapers could be seen, along with the zooming cars in the distance. Neon lights could be seen everywhere, and sitting on a chair close to this window was none other than Ryuk, Void in his lap, as his hands gently brushed through its glistening dark fur. Nostalgic, Ryuk replied with the first word that came to his mind, as he turned to look at Aster. She had changed her dress from her uniform-looking attire to fluffy blue pajamas. She took the seat beside Ryuk, tapping on its armrest twice as a glass table appeared from the open space on the ground. She laid the tray onto it. On it, there was a jug of wine and a jug of milk, and curiously, there were actually 3 cups instead of 2, with one more of a bowl than a cup. The sound of sniffing rang out as Ryuk watched Void open one of its eyes, and its smile grew when it looked at the biggest cup on the tray, smiling starstruck. Aster rolled her eyes at the cat as she poured the milk into the large bowl, and Void leapt toward its bowl, before instantly teleporting away, appearing on the bed at the side. Lying down on its tummy, its tongue stuck out, and just like that, it began licking the milk. I expected it would drink more civilly with its exceptional intelligence. Ryuk muttered under his breath as he looked at Void before shrugging his shoulders, turning to Aster, who held out a cup to him. "Thank you," he voiced out, as she took hers and took a long gulp, while Ryuk took a small sip before gently placing the cup back on the glass table. "Wanna go first, or should I?" he asked, as Aster placed down her cup, turning to look at Ryuk before responding. "I'll go first," she said, as she inhaled a bit as if to get her breath, before she quietly began. "After we entered the ruin of Niagara, I was sent into a test ground. It was a simple test, something about being able to draw runic inscriptions. I'm already used to runic inscription from my vast experience, so I was able to finish it in just about a day or 2. I was given a card and was sent out, but when I got out, I didn't see you. I decided to wait, but after a week of waiting, my curiosity about what was happening outside got the better of me, and I decided to leave. But I placed down a tracker on my own telecommunication device and placed another one in the sound so that when you got out, you would be able to find where I was, and we would be together to flesh out the plan of ridding Enderath of the Nulls. But I waited, and waited, and waited, came back to the ruin a couple of times. I didn't find you, and my card was still there, buried in the sand. After 3 months of waiting and searching all over the place, it hit me that you perhaps never came out of the ruin." Aster said as she turned to look at Ryuk, who silently stared at her, and she paused in her words, exhaling a bit before continuing. "When a person goes absent for close to 3 months within a ruin, especially the same ruin that took another person just a day to get back out, then it's safe to say that person is already dead," Aster said as her hands gripped the cup, but Ryuk waved her off. "It's okay, Aster. You assumed I died, didn't you?" he said as Aster nodded. "Yeah, I did. But you didn't lose hope that I was alive," he completed, as she turned to him with eyes that asked, "How did you know?" "Well, you left the tracking device buried in the sand, even when you could have removed it more than a couple of times. The fact that that was still there showed you at least hoped I would come out one day, pick up the card, and track you down. The card was your sign of hope," he replied, as Aster's eyes flashed. "But don't you feel, I don't know, that I thought you died? It's fine. It's not the first time I've come back only to realize the people I know already thought I was dead anyway," Ryuk said with a shrug as Aster exhaled before she continued. "A total of a month after I came back from the ruin, the Third Null War went on. As you can guess, it was a swift win. The 10 hegemony families were more prepared after what they learned from the Second War, but that didn't mean it wasn't difficult. In the end, they made a choice to come together, align their equality under the name of the Ascension Alliance. The Fourth War came about 2 months later, and it was quite the battle. But we won it too without much loss. With the 10 families coming together under a banner, it was much safer and much easier. But the problem started at the Fifth War about 2 months later. It was very difficult to win as a new Null type descended, the one referred to as the Null Kings. They were very difficult to defeat, as they had cultivation that rivaled the Eternity grade tier. And as you may already know, Apex energy in this world is much weaker than Abyssal energy, meaning about a total of 3 Eternals would be required just to match a Null King. 4 would be needed to kill one. And we also noticed that instead of a single portal in a single location, 2 portals were appearing at the same time in different places. The Ascension Alliance wasn't ready for the appearance of Null Kings, nor were they ready for 2 portals appearing. So, there was quite the amount of loss. But what I tracked down was that these losses were mostly because of a lack of information and communication. When the Fifth War came, some Eternity-grade experts didn't even have each other's numbers in hand, and none could contact each other at all. That was when I thought of creating an organization. More of an information organization. I wanted to know what was happening in real time and have the Eternity-grade experts be able to communicate with each other, linking them all to me who has eyes everywhere. I called it the Starweave Organization, and its main purpose was for me to keep an eye on what was happening with the Null War. Although we expanded with tasks of evacuating the areas where a Null portal would be opening soon. The Starweave Organization is the eyes of Endearth, working hand in hand against the Nulls, supporting the Ascension Alliance. The war that happened today was the 6th, and it has been a year since we both left for the ruin. A full year with about a week, Aster summarized, as Ryuk inhaled from the amount of information. It was a lot to take in. He had expected that when he came back, he would be met with the Third Null War having been finished, or yet to even start. After all, he had only spent about 2 weeks in the Metasla world. But who would have thought? An entire year had already passed on Endearth. Aster remained quiet, giving Ryuk some time to process her words. But then she watched as his brows knitted in confusion. "What is it?" She couldn't help but ask, as he turned to her, his lips parting. "Why did you continue to fight, even after I was gone? Creating an organization, trying to help out the Ascension Alliance with information, helping Endiarthians evacuate. You didn't need to do all that since the deal was you would help me as much as you can to win the war against the Nulls, but I was nowhere to be found. Yet you continued still. Now that I know a full year has passed, I didn't expect you would do so much," Ryuk said, as Aster placed her cup to the table, before staring out the window. "And don't tell me it was because of the contract grimoire. When I died, then even though the contract grimoire is still there, I was absent, meaning I could no longer stop you from leaving Endearth altogether. And if I remember correctly, I already got rid of the stay around me always clause, meaning you could have left Endearth alone and gone about your own life. So, why stay? Because it was all because of me?" Aster said, as Ryuk's eyebrows knitted. "Because of you? All you wanted was a place to lie low, Ryuk. You were going to do that before I told you we were in this together and took you to the ruin of Niagara. I didn't expect you wouldn't return, but the truth is, I was the one who took you to the ruin of Niagara. I was the one responsible for your absence. I could never leave this world unless I found a way to redeem myself for what I had done. And that was when it occurred to me that all you wanted in the first place was for Endearth to be rid of the Nulls. So, I took it upon myself to see that your last wish was at least fulfilled. That was why I stayed. That was why I did everything I did. Because of the guilt I felt for ending your life," Aster whispered, as the room descended into silence. Ryuk's lips parted, trying to say something, but in the end, no words came out, and he simply decided to remain silent. Minutes passed in that silence, perhaps hours, before a whisper broke through. "When you said we were in this together previously, I didn't think you meant it that much. When I saw that Ruin Guardian, I thought you just wanted me to help you defeat the Ruin Guardian. That was why you brought me there in the first place. Not that you were genuinely trying to find a place for me to lie low. But now," Ryuk said as he turned to Aster, looking into those deep star-like blue eyes, "now I know, you meant every word of it, Aster. You hold more good in your heart than I thought was there," he said as she rolled her eyes. But then her gaze softened. She sank silently into her chair before she smiled. "You just wanted it. You wanted to save Endearth so bad. And it moved me so much I couldn't just leave it alone and watch it be destroyed during your absence. Especially when I had a role to play in it. Not that I held much good or anything. It was your conviction. It moved me, just by being there, even if you yourself were absent. Thank you, Astralaxia," Ryuk said, "for sticking by my side or conviction when you had the chance to leave it all behind and continue with your own goal. Thank you," he said, as Aster's eyes flashed before she shook her head. "I'm just glad to know you're alive. I can feel the guilt leaving, and that's what I've always dreamed of every night since your absence, she said. Well, hopefully, the conviction to help is still there now that I'm not dead, Ryuk said teasingly as Aster rolled her eyes. Shut up, goof, she shot back as he chuckled. The joke softened the heavy emotions in the room, as Aster exhaled deeply. Ryuk watched her expression brighten back up as she turned to him. What about you, Ryuk? How did you spend an entire year in the trial? And if you don't mind me asking, how did you grow so strong that you could take on an entire army of Endearth on your own? Your form physically has changed so massively. It's like you're a completely different Ryuk, Aster asked, eyes full of curiosity, and Ryuk decided to reveal the truth. I passed the first trial, even though mine was more of a battle test. But I lost my body after the battle. I was bodiless, you could say. When I opened my eyes, I found myself in this new body of mine. It's like robotic or something, and it was fused to me by a scientist from a race known as the Silverunics. Have you ever heard of them? Silverunics? I've never heard of them, Aster said as Ryuk nodded. They're quite a powerful race, have about 14 or so eternity-grade experts among them. They also don't use apex energy. They cultivate Aetheris instead, and they kinda taught me a lot about Aetheris itself, he said as Aster nodded. I can see you're already at the Cymancer stage, but what were you doing in their realm in the first place? Do you find out what the trail wanted? She asked. What I needed to collect the trial reward was to bathe in some Aetheris sea, which was held in one of their sacred grounds, and I gained access to it by joining one of their tests for their children. All of this took just about a week plus 4 or 5 days or so. 2 weeks max. I didn't expect so much time would have passed on Endearth, though. An entire year is just off the charts, Ryuk said, as Aster furrowed her brows before sighing. There's a massive distance and hence time dilation between both realms. That could be the reason. So you gained a new body from this race, and they also taught you how to use Aetheris. I don't think they would agree to do that for you, a stranger for free, Aster said with suspicion, as Ryuk paused in his sip. For free? The bastard scientist who fused me with this body definitely doesn't have that word in his dictionary. It was a body from some ancient race that he had been researching and had tried to fuse with others, but they weren't reacting to it. But for some reason, when he fused it with me, it worked. And his action of asking for me to be taught in Aetheris cultivation was because Aetheris could speed up the fusion with the body. In short, I was a test subject, a lab rat for him to understand an ancient robotic model. And how did you manage to get your neck off that? She asked as Ryuk shrugged. The trial required me to bathe in the Aetheris sea, so once I did that, it naturally teleported you out of the realm, Aster said, eyes dawning in realization as Ryuk grinned. That's quite clever. I can bet they all were looking at you in disbelief as they watched you fade away from their world, Aster said, giggling, as Ryuk laughed out loud. Oh, they definitely were looking at me in disbelief when I left. But it was also because the dumb scientist didn't know how much potential an ancient race's body contained. If he knew, things would have gotten more tricky. Ryuk mused under his breath before his eyes flashed as he asked, Do you remember my mentor, Madwhite? Aster furrowed her brows before a bit of light sparked in them. You mean that white-haired, genetically altered guy? She asked, as Ryuk nodded but then furrowed his eyebrows. Why do you call him genetically altered? I can remember you saying that when you met with him the last time, too. He couldn't help but notice, and Aster replied, That's because he's genetically altered. He's not a true human as he has different blood flowing through him. The blood of the Titans. I could already sense that the first day I saw him, she said, as Ryuk's eyes narrowed. Madwhite is a hybrid of Titans? He wondered. But then he also knew how much he hated the Titans, and that was when it occurred to him that it might just be part of the reason why he hated the Titans so much. Yes, him. Where is he now? He pressed on. The humans stopped getting involved with the Null War after the Fourth Gate invasion. They were too weak and would be nothing but cannon fodder. Although, their strongest and Madwhite's father is still a part of the high seat of the Ascension Alliance. I haven't heard of Mad White ever since then, though, she said, as Ryuk's eyes flashed before they relaxed. Chances of Mad White having died are almost non-existent, especially after his dad has been known to be one of the strongest. He opened his lips to ask about Morgaine, but then decided to keep quiet, and Aster noticed that. What's it? Don't keep it away from me. We're stuck in this together, remember? She said, as Ryuk looked at her teasing expression before he spoke out. I want to pay a visit to the Eclipsed Citadel. There's a person I want to meet there, and I also plan to pay a visit to the Nagas. My pet Isha has been with them since last year. I want to check her out, he said, as Aster's eyes flashed. Hope you aren't checking up on the fallen angels because of what they did to you in the past. Placing a bounty on your head and all that? Aster asked, as Ryuk's eyes flashed and he rose to his feet, turning to the glass wall before him and staring down at the buildings and zooming cars. I don't have that in mind, but there are chances of things going south very fast once I get there. Why do you ask? Well, it's because the fallen angels are a major pillar in us being able to push back the nulls, she said as Ryuk turned to her. Really? He asked, and she nodded her head, rising to her feet and coming to stand by Ryuk's side as she also looked down at the lively street below. Yes, there are a total of 4 Eternity-grade experts from the fallen angels, including the half-fallen one herself. The most other families possess is 2 at most, the Titan family. And important to note is the other families don't know the fallen angels have 4 Eternity-grade experts. They thought it was only the half-fallen one. But when things got worse, the Eternity experts suddenly started coming out to aid. They've helped save millions of lives, she said, as Ryuk's eyebrows furrowed. Not like I'm trying to dissuade you from taking revenge for them putting a bounty on your head and trying to kill you off. I'm just asking you not to go on full kill mode. Whatever losses the fallen suffer, it radiates through the entire Anison Alliance, and with how dangerous things are now, destroying them all is not the best move on the chessboard, she said, as Ryuk's eyes flashed and he turned to look at Aster. She seemed to be able to feel his gaze as she turned to look at him and watched him smirking mockingly at her. Do you really think I'm psychopathic enough to destroy an entire race because they placed a bounty on my head? 95% of the Fallens most likely have no idea what I even look like. The ones I have a problem with are the 5% who do, and the half-fallen one who placed the bounty on my head. But just as I said, I'm not going there for revenge. I just want to meet a fallen amongst them, Ryuk said, as Aster looked into his eyes before she exhaled in relief. That's comforting to hear, she said, turning her attention back to the view. Silence reigned on for a while before she uttered. With the video of your battle with the Nulls today. Ryuk nodded. And what about that? The world will want to know your identity. I can craft that for you by saying you're the supreme weave of the Starweave organization. There's always been an available hierarchy that I believe only you will best fit. I just need the permission that you want to be affiliated with that, she said as Ryuk nodded. The organization you founded, Starweave, was due to the same goal we share, to get rid of the Null invasion on Endearth. It's the only organization I can be affiliated with at all, so I think it's okay. I might not have time to be able to appear on cameras though, he added as Aster chuckled. What's with you and trying to stay off attention? One would expect a person young like you to be a sucker for it, she said as Ryuk shrugged it off. I just don't like too much attention on me. Why? Could it be because you feel your secrets are not safe when under the scrutiny of the masses? She asked, and Ryuk asked in return. Secrets? Yes, you being a null. You being so young yet so strong. You're like a 18 or 19-year-old kid, yet stronger than ancient ones that have lived for centuries. That's alarming, at least to Endiarthians. Those things, she said, as Ryuk's eyes flashed before his eyes steeled. Actually, I'm planning to stop hiding this secret soon, you know? What? Aster exclaimed in shock. Not that I want to go around reminding people that, oh, I'm a null, look at me. Or I'm so strong and young too. That's dumb. But I don't want to deny it anymore. If the fallen angels think me a null and placed a bounty on my head, I don't want to deny it when they ask me if I'm a null. I am a null. That's who I am. No more lies, he said aloud, as Aster looked at him silently for a long while. Ryuk felt it and couldn't help but turn to her, seeing her gaze seemingly lost in thought. Hey Aster? You okay? He couldn't help but ask, waving his hand before her face, and it managed to snap her out of it. I am. I'm just thinking, you sound a bit more changed compared to the last time, you know? Even more convicted, wanting to reveal you're a null. Just so you know, last time I saw you, you got rid of a fallen without thinking twice, simply because he knew you were a null. And you did that to protect that secret. I was just wondering what has changed. Is it because you have the strength now, and even if the world knows you're a null, they wouldn't be able to do much anyway? Aster asked, as Ryuk shook his head. No, that's not why. I'm just tired of it now. Tired of hiding what I am. But also tired of having to care about what people will think about me once they learn I'm a null. I was only afraid of people finding out I'm a null previously because I didn't know how they'd see me, or what they'd say about me. I was afraid of them changing, of me losing them, just because I'm a null. But now I'm tired of that. If they matter enough to me, I want to stop hiding what I am, and see if they accept me for who I am. Just like how you did, Aster, he said as Aster's eyes flashed. She truly had accepted Ryuk for who he was, even though she knew he was a null. But the only reason why I acted and stuck with you even though I knew you were a null was because I understood you enough to know. No one probably wants to get rid of the null more than you do. I don't know how you're a null or ended up as one since you look nothing like one, but I know you truly are not one. If anything, you're better than them. But you must also understand something important, Ryuk. And what's that? Endiarthians have been tormented by the nulls since they could remember, you know? How many people have been lost to the previous null war? Millions? Billions? And more are being lost in this war, too. Part of these people are someone's father, someone's brother, someone's uncle. They've been hurt by the nulls, scarred by them, and now, their hearts may be filled with nothing but hatred for the nulls. So much hatred that they will never be able to accept that they're friends with one who bore even the slightest affiliation with the nulls. There is a possibility that their hatred for the nulls clouds the fact that you are important to them. And I just think that's something you need to know before you reveal to anyone that you're a null. I don't have much hatred for the nulls, nor do I wage any battle with them. I've only read about them and have, of course, come across some of them in the past, but I don't have a personal grudge with any of them. Perhaps that's what made it easier for me to accept the fact that you're one. If one of my family or someone I care about had been taken by the nulls or something, then it might have been a bit hard for me to easily accept the fact you bear an affiliation with one, wouldn't it? She asked as Ryuk's eyebrows furrowed. Her words held their truth. But what do I do then? What do I do when they ask if I'm a null? Do I keep telling them no? Would they not feel even angrier when they find out I lied to them about what I am and kept such an important secret for so long? Ryuk whispered out, as Aster furrowed her eyebrows before she exhaled. I don't know what you can do. I'd also feel pain if I knew you were a null and you were hiding it from me, especially if we're more than just two people doing a business deal and trying to stick to their words. The only thing I would say is try and keep it down. Don't tell anyone you're a null. At least not until they would argue to the death that you're not a null, even if they saw you transform into one. Or if they desperately need to know, or you feel like it can no longer be hidden from them, then it would make sense to come clean. If they're that desperate to know you're a null, they must have already concluded what being a null means and have accepted that. If someone loves a monster enough, they would lie enough to themselves to believe that he or she is not a monster, even if the proof is right before them. If they know that knowing you're a null can make them lose you, yet they still want to know, then it just means they're already ready to lose you. And it's better to just lose them right then and there, she said, as Ryuk simply remained silent, looking into the distance. It was already starting to get really dark outside as Ryuk turned back, his hands reaching for Void, who was already asleep on the bed, and he placed him back into the pet world. Thanks for catching me up on everything, Aster. Good night. he said with a smile before he reached for the doorknob. Wait, we can? She tried to say, but was met with the sound of the door shutting closed and Ryuk's footsteps receding. Aster looked at the door where Ryuk had disappeared, and she remained in that position quietly for a while before she turned back to the view. Her hands stretched outward as she tapped on the glass fading into a color of black and hiding the majority of light that was entering the room, before she hopped onto the bed, burying herself in the covers. Ryuk stood above the roof, clothes flapping from the breeze at such an altitude. Aster's home was a penthouse, located at the ultimate top of a building about 500 meters high in the air. Standing on the building itself, there weren't many other buildings around that tall, and Ryuk could see through all the other structures surrounding him. His eyes moved around in a circle before they settled on an area. A large monument with the words, Eclipsed Citadel, written on it. His hands moved to his heart, feeling its thumping, as Ryuk looked at the monument. One thing he wanted was in that place, yet he felt so much fear he felt paralyzed. He could guess Morgaine would already know about her mother's bounty on his head, and of course her reasons, which were that he was a null. So if he appeared before her, her first question would be simple. Is it true, Ryuk? Are you really a null? That question was something Ryuk didn't know how to answer. The reason wasn't because he had lost his vocal cords. It was because, if he said yes, there was a chance of losing her. And that was what he was most afraid of. Her rejection. Her saying no. I can't live with you. I can't live with a null. He could move right now and meet with her. She was just a few minutes away from him. But no matter how hard he tried, he could never move a single leg forward toward the castle. Tsh! A groan left Ryuk's lips as his hands clenched tightly within his palms, nails scraping against his metallic hands. But in the end, his eyes relaxed as he turned to look up at the starlights in the sky. I'm not ready yet, Morgaine. I'm not ready to lose you yet. So, I'll leave it for now. Maybe I need to make sure you know I'm not a null in the sense of what your people think before I can come clean to you, he muttered to himself as he turned away from the Eclipse Citadel, facing another direction. I wonder how you're doing, Isha. It's been a long time, Ryuk mused to himself, a smile sneaking its way through his lips, and in the instant, he elevated off the building before instantly zooming into the distance, becoming a light beam that quickly moved into the horizon. Have you seen the stream, Elder Selene? The voice rang out through an icy throne room, where sat a figure on a throne, eyes looking at a holographic panel that was flickering before her gaze. All of a sudden, the temperature dropped by a couple of 100 degrees, and emerging from the void was none other than a tall, white-haired woman, seemingly exiting from the void to stand before the woman sitting on the throne. What stream? She asked, but then raised her gaze to the holographic panel flashing in front of Queen Snowwardow. Her eyes and brow furrowed as she watched the footage, shock radiating in her crystallized blue gem of eyes. The footage showed a video where a horned individual, whose face she couldn't clearly see, faced an army of nulls on his own. But what surprised her the most was his action of killing a Null King solo. That was something even she herself couldn't pull off, unless she went all out. And going all out would no doubt have its repercussions. When did this happen? Elder Selene asked as Queen Snowwardow responded. Just a couple of hours ago. According to my reports, both wars have already been stopped. And we have once more won the 6th Null invasion. It's safe to say he was the one responsible for that, as he had ordered all of the Eternity Guard experts fighting in Zone A to leave for Grade C and help out, while he himself faced this Null army alone. And truly, he had done just that, ensuring both war victories. What's scary isn't the fact he got rid of a Null King, it's how easy he makes it look. He doesn't seem like he's being pushed to his limits at all, Queen Snowwardow observed as Elder Selene's gaze furrowed. But then, the temperature suddenly plummeted by another 100 degrees as a new figure appeared in the room. It was a young lady, about the age of 18. Snow-white skin, the clearest of white, was her complexion, and she stood about a height of 1.6 meters. Clad in a white gown that held a hoodie, within the hoodie, one could see a young, innocent face with some parts of her cheek holding silvery blue scales that flashed with blue runes in them. The lady's eyes were as cold as ice. No, even colder, and they scanned the two individuals in the room who turned their gaze to her. Her cold gaze moved past them, settling on the image projected in the footage. A deep light flashed in her eyes as she walked forward, raising her hand to the air and tapping on the replay button. And once more, she watched the fight with the horned young man. Her eyes flashed in confusion. But when the video finished, she played it once more, and then once more, and then once more. It finally drew the attention of Queen Snowardo and Elder Selene, who turned their furrowed eyebrows toward her. It's the first time they had seen her place so much interest in something, or be so attracted to something to play it more than once. What's wrong? Know him from somewhere? Elder Selene couldn't help but ask, turning to look at the girl, who finally turned her gaze from the footage before turning to the side and whispering, "Familiar. I'm curious, though. If there were such a strong expert in the world, why is he only coming out now? What family owns him?" Queen Snowardo said in suspicion. Or perhaps he was never here to begin with, or one of the fallen eternity experts kept in slumber for many years. Elder Selene added in, but then, footsteps. Immediately, all three Isha, Elder Selene and Queen Snowardo, all rose to their feet, gazes snapping to the entrance of the hall. They didn't hear the sound of those footsteps. They felt it, deep within their existence. It was a feeling of absolute power making its way toward them, and they didn't even dare move an inch, as it was already before them before they could make any thoughts. All they could do was watch as the steps eventually came to rest before the closed gates of the throne room. Then, knock. The sound of 3 knockings resounded as Queen Snowardo watched the flickering of runes on the throne room gates. But then, she rained down the feeling of caution in her heart before she responded. "Come in, Grum." Immediately, the sound of the silvery white throne room gates being pushed from both sides rang out, and stepping in was a peculiar figure. A peculiar young man, dressed in a simple white shirt and trousers, stood at an exceptional height of 2.1 meters. His eyes were a blue rotating vortex, held in a face that seemed to have been crafted by perfection itself. Most eye-catching were those 2 horns of his, golden dots of light flickering at their tips, as he calmly stepped into the room. His eyes looked at each of them in the room, who stared back at him in silence. It scraped past Queen Snowardo and Elder Selene before it turned to the third figure in the room. For a second, they watched his eyes change from a normal expression to one of absolute shock upon looking at the little lady, who also eyed him with the same shock in her eyes. But then watched the shock receding before a cold breath escaped his lips and he called out, "Been a long time, Isha." His voice rang out through the throne room, and immediately, eyes flashed in shock as the trio remained rooted in their spot. That voice, they could feel it somewhere within their bones, oozing with an incredible amount of familiarity. And the one to snap out of her shock first was none other than Isha, who took a step forward and silently blinked out of existence with a step, appearing a meter before Ryuk, her eyes staring up at him. Ryuk? She struggled to say, but felt her answer when he took a step forward, covering the remaining distance appearing before her while spreading both arms apart. "Come here, you little thing." The coldness. It was just as Ryuk remembered it, as he felt that coldness radiating through his body from the figure in his embrace. "You've gotten warmer?" Isha's voice rang out directly in Ryuk's mind. He smiled as he responded. "And you're just as cold as I remember you were. How's it been in here, Isha? How have they treated you?" Ryuk asked telepathically, and Isha responded. Good. She had been honest and had followed through with her words. She replied as Ryuk's eyes slowly opened up, and both finally separated from their embrace. Isha hung onto his arm by his side as Ryuk turned to look at Queen Snowardo and Elder Selene. "Seems like I owe both of you a thank you for following through with your words," he said, as Queen Snowardo smiled while Elder Selene simply scoffed. "I have to give it to you, though, kid. Just when I thought you were gone, you came back after a whole year, and just had to announce your return with quite the loud bang," Elder Selene said as Ryuk turned his gaze to the footage playing. His eyebrows furrowed before he clasped his forehead. I can assure you that was never meant to be recorded. It was a slip-up. And I was never gone. Just on a ruin mission. He replied as Elder Celine's eyebrows furrowed suspiciously at him. I'm just glad to see you're alive. Isha had gotten colder and colder the longer it took you to arrive. We all thought you had given up the ghost, especially after meeting with Peak Starweave Astralaxia. She told us you might not be returning anytime soon, Queen Snowrdo said, and Ryuk nodded his head. It's okay. I'm back now. And thank you for the good treatment of Isha. It had been on my mind for as long as I had been in the ruin, especially knowing I could have just summoned her back to my side, but didn't due to the promise I gave. But it seems that decision was for the best, he said, as Elder Celine raised her hands before shrugging him off. You've said that twice now, and Isha isn't just a trainee anymore. She's family to the Nagas now. We would naturally take care of one of our own. The words we held in exchange for training her. She will lead us to the real world of us frost wyverns, Elder Celine said, stepping forward towards Ryuk. And if I remember correctly, she would only get back her memory when she reaches the eternity stage, he replied, and she nodded her head. Yes, she's just a little step away from reaching the eternity stage, and she already has some of the memories unfurled. We have a map, albeit incomplete, she said, and before Ryuk, an icy runic image appeared in the shape of a map. His eyes narrowed. There were a lot of little star bodies present in the map, and he studied the runic lines carefully. There were also many unknown names labeled across it. With just a bit more time, we should be able to complete the map, Elder Celine said, as the map faded from the throne room. If she reaches the eternity stage, she would awaken her full memory and get all the missing map pieces, right? Ryuk asked Elder Celine, who furrowed her eyebrows, not understanding why he asked the obvious truth, but nodded her head. Well then, I would be back with her once she reaches the eternity stage. I think that'll take less time for her to reach the eternity stage if she's with us. Don't you think? Elder Celine said, but Ryuk calmly shook his head. No, I don't know how long it will take, but it'll be faster with me. Trust me, he said, but Elder Celine shook her head. I doubt that, and for good reasons too. Well then, we both can agree she will reach the eternity stage one day or another. So why not ask her then, whose side she wants to stay on while she achieves that milestone? Ryuk asked, tauntingly, as Elder Celine furrowed her eyebrows before she grinned confidently. I have no. Okay. Can we all take a step back and try to just make this a good reuniting moment instead of a battle over who holds possession of her? Queen Snowrdo said, silencing them both before the issue escalated. Ryuk and Elder Celine furrowed their eyebrows, staring at each other suspiciously. Tap! The sound of clapping resounded as Ryuk watched the empty throne room begin to change. A glass table formed of ice appeared on the ground, along with icy seats, as they all took a seat. The golden gates opened up, and coming in were none other than some of the Nagas, who served cold ice drinks. But throughout the entire serving, Ryuk and Elder Celine didn't stop looking at each other suspiciously, creating quite the awkward scene between them. After the maids served the drinks and left, leaving just them in the room once more, Queen Snowrdo spoke out. Hey Isha, can you help me call Seraphis? I think she should be in her meditation room, Queen Snowrdo said, as Isha furrowed her cold gaze, but eventually rose up and blinked out of the room. The gates to the throne room closed behind her. Immediately after she was gone, the chaos unfurled. It took you an entire year on a ruin training? Yeah, that sounds quite suspicious. Don't you think so, Snow? Elder Celine said, turning to Queen Snowrdo, who could only roll her eyes as Ryuk's hand stretched downward, picking up his coffee, but not without replying. Well, I can guess this mundane part of your world probably has never heard of a time dilation before. Ryuk said as he calmly took a sip of his coffee. Tesuke, I don't trust you at all, Elder Celine said as Ryuk shrugged helplessly. Neither do I. My choice of leaving Isha here wasn't a heartfelt one. Remember? I was forced, Ryuk said back. And if I remember correctly, you were considering getting me killed, too, just to have Isha. What? You expect me to suddenly trust you now because a year passed on End-Earth? So, you're back now, feeling like you now have a choice? Elder Selene shot back as Ryuk opened his eyes, and they both watched as his eyes began revolving with the blue vortex once more as he turned to look at Elder Selene. Immediately, Elder Selene's eyes flashed as she looked at her own hands and watched the hair on them standing on end. Yes, I do. And it would be faster than you blinking? Ryuk called out calmly, using the words she had used on him the last time, resulting in a scoff from Elder Selene. I doubt that. Trust me. You don't want to find out, Ryuk responded, as Elder Selene's eyes slowly began changing, turning into a serpentine-line form. But it didn't take long before she noticed Ryuk's eyes changing too, his normal blue irises morphing until they also formed a straight line like hers. A serpentine aura snaked through both of them, and Elder Selene's eyes flashed in shock. The same went for Queen Snowdorf, who couldn't help but notice the rapid change Ryuk was exuding. His aura had changed from something humane to that of a beast, just like Elder Selene. You're a beast, Queen Snowdorf said, snapping Ryuk out of it. He blinked his eyes, and as fast as that, Ryuk's serpentine eyes had changed back to normal. You're not a human, Elder Selene said with more than enough certainty. That aura. That was the aura of a beast. It was anything but human. Yes. I'm not, Ryuk responded without a care in the world, as they both reeled in shock. But Ryuk had his eyes closed, distant, feeling the coldness that radiated through his throat as he took sips of the drink in his hands. You? What are you then? Does Isha have any idea about that? Queen Snowdorf asked, as Ryuk opened his eyes, scoffing. Human or not, what does that change for her? Does it stop her from being Isha that I know? Or stop me from being the same Ryuk that she knows? Ryuk asked as he took a long sip and then placed the cup back onto the table. But to be fair, it might change both of your perceptions of me, but honestly, I don't really care that much either. In fact, I wish it did. So I don't have to come back here again, Ryuk said as they watched his eyes change once more into that serpentine state. But then it began receding when a minute of silence passed. You're glitching in and out of your beastly form. That happens to the newborn hybrids. So whatever you are, you're still new to it. Elder Selene muttered under her breath as Ryuk's eyebrows furrowed. Newborn hybrids? He asked, noting that word as Elder Selene's eyes flashed, realizing her slip-up. But then Queen Snowdorf continued. Yes, we Nagas are hybrids. Hybrids of our race, Ishios and frost wyverns, she said, as Ryuk's eyes flashed in shock. Hybrids? You Nagas are hybrids? He asked in disbelief, as Elder Selene turned her gaze to Queen Snowdorf. You sure you want to reveal to him your ancestry secret? She asked, as Queen Snowdorf shrugged. If that will make him feel safer, with him being a hybrid too, then it's fine by me. And Isha already noticed that. It's only a matter of time before she reveals that to him personally, Queen Snowdorf said, as Ryuk's eyebrows furrowed. To learn that the Nagas were actually hybrids was quite the shock. But then, it now made sense why the Frost Wyverns decided to settle with the Nagas instead of the other 10 families. It was because they were one of their ancestors in the first place. It made sense to know, but it didn't change much for him. So in the end, he only shrugged it off. That's surprising to know, but I don't care too. Why are we having this meeting anyway? Ryuk asked, as he finished his cold drink with a long sip. Queen Snowdorf's eyes flashed before she moved her hand toward the mug to pour some more for him. But the mug was grabbed by Ryuk faster before she could touch it. I can fill my cup up, he said to her as he filled up his cup, before laying back the mug on the table. Because I need to know if your reason for being absent from Isha's life was truly because you were in a ruin. We want to know if Isha will be safe with you or not, Queen Snowdorf said, as Elder Selene added in. Since you're substantially looking quite different from the previous Ryuk we knew too, she added as Ryuk's eyebrows furrowed. And what does that mean? What's with the horns? She asked, as Ryuk narrowed his eyes before he asked. Do they look evil or demonic? He replied as Elder Selene furrowed her eyes at those horns, as if truly considering his words, before she responded. It actually doesn't. Radiates a bit of an aura of royalty to it, something that doesn't fit the previous Ryuk, too, she added as Ryuk grinned. I'll take that as a compliment. My point is the horns make it hard to really know if it's you or not, Elder Selene said as Ryuk took a long sip of his drink before responding. I am Ryuk. The horns, the new face, the glitching beast form, none of that defines who I am. Isha knows that more than anyone here does, even more than me. So she'll be safe and fine by my side, just like how she was safe and fine before I was forced to relinquish her to you, he said to Elder Selene, whose eyes narrowed, annoyance flickering in them. But then Queen Snowardo picked up the real problem. You're still mad about what happened in the past. You're mad at yourself for giving Isha up. You felt like you gave her up because of your weakness, she said, as Ryuk's eyebrows knitted. But then they relaxed as he took another long sip before he exhaled a cold breath. I didn't feel like I gave her up. I gave her up. And that too because I was weak. If I were strong like I am now back then I never would have agreed to that dumb deal, which I didn't have a choice but to accept. I never would have had Isha snatched away from my side. And I hate her for that. He turned his attention to Elder Selene, whose annoyed expression flashed in realization and then reverted back to normal. Now she understood the reason for Ryuk's anger, and it wasn't what she had thought. The realization made her eyes soften a bit. I understand why you're still mad at me for the past, forcing you to give Isha up. But what I did helped her. That's not something you can't deny. When she came in, Isha was very weak, skill-wise. In a game of skills, all the other Frost Wyverns were toying with her, and she was rendered pretty helpless. The only thing she could do was rely on her physical might, which was quite extraordinary, and her incredibly pure frost energy that could brute force its way through the majority of skills. But the results were that those were her only abilities. She lacked the skills, and now, I could say, even I, when it comes to pure skill alone, would be outmatched by Isha. None can take her head-on in a battle of skills. She's the second strongest Frost Wyvern in the family, and the only way I can defeat her now is by brute-forcing her with a sheer amount of ice essence. That is a massive improvement. And the fact that she has gained human form is also something to be considered. Wild Frost Wyverns will never gain a human form. Without safety, Frost Wyverns don't shift to that form. Isha achieved her human form 6 months ago, and we all agreed you were dead 7 months ago. It at least showed that even after you were gone, she still felt safe here. A sign of being treated right. She grew stronger and got to stay for a year around her own race. I think when you look at things from that side, you would be less mad about her being forcefully yanked away in the first place. Elder Selene recounted as Ryuk's eyebrows creased, looking at the lady. But when he saw the suspicious lights in those blue eyes of hers fade, and when he pondered her words, he eventually took a deep breath in, exhaling it slowly before his eyes regained their calm. You're right. Looking at the past will do nothing but make me hate them, and that blinds me from seeing the good that they have done for Isha while I was away. Letting it go will be the best, Ryuk silently thought to himself, and Elder Selene and Queen Snowardo witnessed the thick pressure that had filled the room begin to fade away, until it disappeared completely. I'm sorry for my actions, Queen Snowardo. It was quite disrespectful in your presence, he whispered, but she shook her head. The reason behind it is well understood. If you don't mind me asking though, once you leave here, where did you plan on going next with Isha? She asked, as Ryuk's eyes flashed. The fact that she said he will be leaving with Isha showed they had finally agreed. And when he turned to look at Elder Selene, he found her expression normal. Seems like she had agreed too, and that way he felt more confident to answer. I'm not sure yet. If there's one thing I know though, it's that I want to settle down back on Endearth. I'm strong, I think, but I'm homeless here. And bitchless too. The sound suddenly rang out as a new presence appeared. None other than a black cat sitting on Ryuk's shoulder. Shut it, Void. What? It's the truth. That's important too, and you're lacking it? He argued back as Ryuk reached for it, only for it to teleport away and appear on the table where his cup was. Immediately, it stuck out its tongue and took a lick, only to back off. This is too cold. You have a void cat as a pet? And it talks too? Elder Selene muttered as she looked at Void, who furrowed his gaze at her, clearly offended, before he turned to look at her chest. His offended expression immediately faded away as he replied, "You see, my lady, I am quite the special one amongst cats. Hence, the reason for my speech ability. I've been learning that this is defective in the majority of cats," Void said, as Elder Selene raised an eyebrow at it, catching it swerving skillfully between the cups before it appeared right before her. "If you don't mind, may I ask what the beautiful name is?" he said, but then yelped loudly as Ryuk grabbed at his tummy and pulled him into the pet space with one swift yank. "I'm very sorry about that. Hey, you gotta warn me if you want to throw me back there. I'm helping us both out here. You're bitchless, remember?" Void fired back as it appeared instantly on Ryuk's shoulder, who could only ignore it. "If you're worried about a place to stay, there are more than enough places here with us Frost Wyverns. We could build you anything you want, however you want it," Queen Snowrdo said, as Ryuk shook his head. "No, I want something that is truly mine. So, I'm thinking of joining the Adventurer Guild, becoming an adventurer, getting some money, and using it. With my strength, it should be pretty easy to rank up. The next Null War won't be happening anytime soon. Maybe 2 months?" he asked as Queen Snowrdo nodded. "It will take 2 to 3 months in between if we consider the past rhythm so far." "Good. I guess I won't be needed before that time. So now, I'll focus on integrating back into Indurtha's society. It's feeling a bit alien right now," Ryuk said to himself, and Queen Snowrdo nodded her head. "I understand your point. You want your own independence and comfort. Not something to be given by others, but something you feel like you earned through your own hard work. It's fine to want that, and I don't think it will be that difficult either. But keeping a low profile will be hard. I think most will be able to recognize you just with those horns alone," Queen Snowrdo said as Ryuk shrugged. "I'll find a way." Grum. In the next instant, the door opened up, and coming into the throne room was none other than Isha, and a mature young lady. "Seraphis, is that you? Ryuk?" The voice, mixed with intense disbelief and emotion, rang out as Ryuk's eyebrows creased. He watched as Seraphis blinked out and reappeared right before him, her face tilting down. Ryuk instinctively leaned back as he saw those silvery blue eyes scan every inch of his eyes, before they beamed. "It's you. It's really you," Seraphis voiced out, barely able to keep her excitement down, as Ryuk replied, "Good to see you too, Seraphis? Get a hold of yourself, Seraphis. You're acting like a lover girl," Queen Snowrdo said out loud, immediately bringing Seraphis out of it. She backed off from Ryuk, her face turning red. She tried to say, but then forced it down as she turned to look at Queen Snowrdo before bowing her head. "My queen," she voiced out, as she slithered off with speed and took her position behind her. "Seraphis and Isha are quite very close," Queen Snowrdo explained, and Ryuk nodded his head. "True. The only person who touched Isha without her flinching, after me, was Seraphis. They had quite the chemistry even back in the Ascension Academy," Ryuk said as the queen nodded. "A year of being together has deepened their bonds, and since Isha wouldn't stop talking about how amazing you are, Seraphis herself came to miss your absence, almost as much as Isha herself does. Hence her behavior when she saw you're alive," Queen Snowrdo explained, as realization dawned on Ryuk. He turned a side glance to Seraphis, who turned her head to the side, hiding the pink hue in her cheeks. "That's quite heartwarming, and unexpected too. What would I know? You do have that aura of being able to get quite quickly into people's good shoes, especially that of young girls. I would never imagine there would be a day when I'd see a beast missing its beast tamer so much after his death, and taking so amazingly about him, enough to thaw the heart of someone as cold as Seraphis." "My heart is not cold," Seraphis whispered from behind the throne as Elder Selene grinned. Oh really? If I remember correctly, your mother found her true love when she was 17 and they married 5 years later. Your grandmother found hers when she was 18, and they married 4 years later. How many years old is Seraphis again? Elder Selene asked, turning to Queen Snowardo, who replied, 20. 20 years, and all the poor men who have tried to court her only get a single fate. Banned from entering the royal palace. Talk of someone who doesn't have a cold heart, Elder Selene said, smiling mischievously at Seraphis, who could only grumble behind her mother. Void! Isha's voice suddenly rang out as she turned to look at the dark cat who was sitting leisurely on Ryuk's shoulder, picking its nails. I thought it would take years to recognize, Void said with a deep humph. Isha flinched a little, seeing Void able to talk, but then her hands reached for him. Despite his protests, he was silenced when Isha held him close to her bosom, his eyes widening to saucers. Ah, heavenly, he called out, resulting in a scoff from everyone sitting in the room, including Ryuk himself. Been a long time, Isha. I've missed your presence. You were the only thing I thought about morning and night. Yeah, right? Ryuk said as he rolled his eyes mockingly at Void. And just so you know, you and I weren't Ryuk's priority during your absence. All that selfish bozo cared about was getting his neck off the hands of an evil scientist that turned him into his lab rat because of his new robot body he fused him with or whatever. My point is, I was the only one who thought of you day and night, Void said as Ryuk clapped his head. The bastard just revealed my secret. Seems like I'll have to get a voice silencer artifact for Void. He thought, and true to his thoughts, the gazes of everyone in the room were now on him. No wonder I felt you were different. You got your body fused with something else, Elder Selene asked confusedly. And by an evil scientist too? What type of ruin is that? Queen Snowardo asked, and Ryuk shrugged. It's a long story. I want to hear it, Isha said as she took her seat close to Ryuk, blinking her eyes at him. When he turned to look at her, he couldn't find a way to say no to her first request, so he could only sigh in the end and give the most basic summary he could manage to all of them. Now it makes more sense, your absence. So you were more or less stuck in another world, with a massive time difference. Queen Snowardo mused. 2 weeks to a year here, that's some truly massive time dilation. The world must be incredibly far away from End-Earth for such to happen. Galaxy-level distance, Elder Selene uttered beneath her breath. And your current strength, being able to match a Null King solo, I'm guessing is tied to this fusion of yours, Elder Selene exclaimed as Ryuk firmly nodded. Yes, it holds massive power, not understood even by the one who fused it with me, and hence why I could break out of their control. I'm glad you're okay, Isha voiced out by his side. Just wished you summoned me to your side. I would have been able to help, she whispered, resting on him as Ryuk swerved her snow-white hair to the back of her ear. Summoning you so far away might have put you in danger. Wouldn't be worth the risk, especially when I could handle it all myself, Ryuk said, resulting in a sweet smile from Isha. Okay, you two lovebirds will make me miss my late husband. Hey Isha, we've agreed to allow you to leave with Ryuk, but on the condition you get to choose what date from now. When will you be leaving with him? Queen Snowardo asked, and Isha replied almost instantly. Now. Tisk? Elder Selene clicked her tongue as Ryuk flashed her a grin. I told you she'll always choose my side, he whispered to her as she humphed coldly. I'll give you a call before the sun goes down, just to check up on you. The whisper came from none other than Seraphis, who held a communication device in her hand. And before her stood none other than Isha, whose communication device dipped as she reached for Seraphis, giving her a tight hug. I'll call you every night, Seraphis. And trust me, I'll come down to check on you sometimes, too. I promise. I believe you. I can't believe I'll ever say this to a beast tamer, but... Elder Selene's voice rang out as Ryuk took his attention away from the two girls, turning to the frost-scaled lady before him, raising an eyebrow. We Frost Wyverns will always have our door open to you, if you're ever in need of it. Elder Selene confessed as Ryuk waved her off. Of course, of course. You still need Isha to get the map back to your true world, so the door will, of course, be open, Ryuk said, as Elder Selene opened her lips to say something. She briefly closed them and clasped her forehead. You're an idiot, she said, before disappearing from the area as Ryuk heard a giggle come from none other than Queen Snowwardow. You know, Ryuk, Elder Selene might just mean it for real this time, not just because of Isha. I know she's very cold, especially to you. But I swear she's thawing already and has decided to bury the past hatchet you both have, Queen Snowwardow said. But then she watched Ryuk grin as he leaned towards her. I know. I just pale at saying goodbye to my previous enemies, he whispered to Queen Snowwardow, who giggled. But then his gaze dropped when he turned his head to the side, and there was Elder Selene grinning mockingly at him. Yep, I heard that too, she said, and it was Ryuk's turn to grow red in the face, as he turned to look at Isha and found her walking towards him. See you soon, Queen Snowwardow. And that reminds me, thank you for your hospitality, especially that cold juice that was served. It was surprisingly good, he said as he rose into the air. Isha followed after, rising farther into the air before. Vroom! A blizzard of frost energy exploded out from her, momentarily blinding all. A gale wind howled, and when next she was revealed, Ryuk saw a hulking 15-meter frost wyvern in the air, her 4 wings 10 meters each in length, flapping with a power that sent massive snow gales with every beat. Immediately, he blinked out of existence, appearing above her as he gave one last respectful bow to the trio who waved back, before Isha flapped her wings, becoming a frozen light that easily shot into the distance, disappearing into the clouds. The sound of sniffing rang out as Queen Snowwardow held the body of her daughter, Seraphis, in her arms, gently patting her back. Don't worry about Isha. She's forever part of us, Nagas. I'm sure she knows that and will return soon, Queen Snowwardow said to her, as Elder Selene looked at the snow-haired lady before her, before an evil idea appeared in her head. Or maybe her tears are those of regret, she said, drawing Queen Snowwardow's attention. What regret? She asked. That she didn't get to tell her first crush just how much she had fallen for him, Elder Selene said, and immediately, the blinding roar rang out. Elder Selene! Seraphis screamed as Elder Selene cackled devilishly. What? It's all over the blush on your face. She shot back at her as they watched a blue vortex open in space, and in a blink, Seraphis was gone. TSK. Young girls. Always so prideful, yet when the one comes, they fall in so easily. She mused under her breath before turning to look at Queen Snowwardow, who gave a smirk before turning her gaze toward the path where Isha had blazed on their exit. What? You're not against her courting feelings for the kid? Elder Selene asked, as Queen Snowwardow shrugged her shoulders. I don't care about that. Seraphis' father was but a commoner, the son of a blacksmith, remember? But he was the one I chose, against all of the handsome and stronger royal males I could have gotten along with. I don't care what she chooses at all. It's solely her choice. But do you not think there's something a bit different about the boy compared to all? She asked as Queen Snowwardow furrowed her gaze, turning to look at the same path. Their eyes both flashed when they saw the sun's rays of light suddenly bloom out from where Ryuk had left, golden remnants of sunlight shining down onto their faces. I feel he's just like these sun rays. An illumination in this gloomy world, Elder Selene whispered as Queen Snowwardow silently nodded her head. I feel it too. His fate is special. And that of those around him too. Ah? A deep exhale left Ryuk's lips as he sat on Isha's back, his hands pressing against her cold scales, which held flickering snowy white light. The sun rays rained down upon his face, his snow-white hair ruffling behind him, and he allowed their passage. This was one of those rare moments when he felt absolute peace radiating through him. Just when I think things are hard or things are gloomy looking, I try my hardest to push through. And when I do, Ryuk thought as he opened his eyes, seeing Void who sat behind Isha's head, pointing its claws and seemingly giving it directions amidst various scoffs and eye rolls. A smile found its way onto his lips as he completed his thought. It always seems more than worth it, he thought to himself as he silently sat down, weaving through the clouds. He had gotten back both Isha and Void, and what's more, he had deepened the bond not just between himself and each of them, but within all three of them. Took hard work and pain to be here, back on Endearth. But it was all well worth it. And when his thoughts drifted to Elder Selene and his decision to forgive her, he realized he was the one who had been hurting by hating her. And letting go of the past and embracing the present was like setting himself free. It is all worth it in the end. This chapter was surprisingly liberating to write. I wonder why. What's up, Goof? You smiling a lot. Ryuk's eyes opened up as he looked at his leg, finding Void sitting before him, studying his expression with a raised eyebrow. What's there not to smile about? Ryuk said as he picked up the dark thing and gave it the hardest hug of its life. I don't know. Hey, you'll squeeze me out. Void screamed and grinned before dropping it back down. So, you asked what's not to smile about, huh? Maybe the fact that you're still bitchless. Void said as Ryuk's expression contorted. What's with you and bitches anyway, Void? He couldn't help but ask. And you seem to have developed quite the unhealthy obsession with female bosoms. That isn't good for my reputation. Reputation? Ha 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 ha. Ryuk's gaze dimmed when he looked at Void rolling around in laughter. Tell me, Ryuk, what reputation do you have? I, Ryuk, am the current savior of Endearth from the 6th Null invasion. I could list 100 more from where that came from. I bet you can't, Void said, flashing him a taunting grin. Ryuk shrugged it off. I'm not after a good reputation, or a reputation at all. I just don't want you acting obscenely. You're a special cat. Remember? You must act like a gentleman. All other cats are perverts, obsessed with snuggling up to women and all that. If you act like them, you show you're just like them, defective. You should be picky about the girls and only choose the best. And stick with her, Ryuk said, as Void curled its claw under its chin, seemingly in deep thought. Your words make sense. But there can't just be one best girl, so it's hard sticking through. What do you mean there can't be just one best girl? Ryuk said with a raised eyebrow as Void began. It's simple, really. When I came to this world, the first girl I laid eyes on was, of course, that blue-haired one. Aster, or what do you call her again? Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Looking at her bosom, I could feel it was tighter, thick, and upright horizontally, almost like it's never been touched before. Then I looked at that Elder Selene's and saw it was less thick, but surprisingly soft-looking. A bit sappy, though, but the size makes up for it. Approximately 2.3 times that of Aster. And then there was Isha, cold yet invigorating. It's like being dipped into the most heavenly of all waters. Even though I, Void, quite hate the cold, I have to agree, that one is one hell of an exception. All of the girls have something exceptional but fundamentally different about them. But the truth is, they're all good in their ways. So is there really a best, you get? He asked, turning to look at Ryuk, who seemed to have just seen a ghost, his mouth hanging wide open, enough to fit an egg. He looked at Void and then clapped a hand onto his forehead. I feel like you'll be the reason for my death, Void. And I'll most likely be dying at the hands of a female. At least you'll die a lucky man. I feel like most men will choose that over getting nuked in war. Void said with a snicker. But then, Ryuk's mind drifted to Void's question. It was surprisingly a hard one to reply to. Well, why not just choose one then? Isha. I'll vouch for Isha, since she makes you feel so heavenly, Ryuk said with a smile while thinking. If I can get him to stick with Isha, then this is already resolved. It won't bring me any trouble. But his expression sank when he saw Void shook his head. I don't know. I feel it a bit constraining to stay with one. Who knows if Aster's would feel even more heavenly, or that Elder's one. There's something special about every bosom, and I, Void, will be seeing it all through. You won't be seeing anything through, Void. Next time you look obscenely at the females, I'll be locking you in the pet space. And trust me, I can do that. The only time you'll get to come out is to have your butt handed to you in one of my fights. And then you'll be sent right back in. Got it? Ryuk asked as he looked threateningly at Void, who raised an eyebrow. Trying to reason with this cat will take him down to the deepest depths of hell. Now, he can only use force. You make it seem like something bad, you goof. It is, Ryuk said, as Void Cat shrugged and moved forward to come wound around his lap. Tell me how. Isn't that obvious? Aster didn't like that, and she thought I was the reason for your lecherousness. When you looked at Elder Celine's and tried asking for her name, your lecherousness was quite clear, and everyone in the room snorted. Girls don't like you looking at them obscenely, so your art makes them feel uncomfortable. Which is bad. No. Well, seems like the current process of studying my art is bad. I'll have to improvise, Void said, seemingly in deep thought, and Ryuk could only roll his eyes. Anyway, Ryuk, you got an offer to stay with the Nagas. The Queen said they can get you a house and furnish it the way you want. Why'd you refuse? Void asked as Ryuk shrugged it off. What? Missing their bosoms? Ryuk asked mockingly as Void shook his head. No. I just want to know why you'll turn down such a good offer. Void replied seriously this time. It's just like I said. I want something of my own effort. Money made with my own hands used to get a house for me. Not just a handout given to me. But not only a house or money, I want an identity too. Something I work to obtain and can be professionally known for. But Aster said she would like to make you the supreme weave of the organization. That's an identity, no? Quite the big one too, Void said as Ryuk shook his head. It is, but I didn't work for it. Where was I when she created the organization? Stuck in some devil-forsaken ruin. She built all that with hard work and sweat. And then I got thrown a position for doing more or less nothing. Well, you didn't exactly do nothing. An Eternity Stage expert or two would have died, and more weaker Ascension Alliance would have gone down in the thousands if you had never gone to that battlefield and fought that Null King alone. So, I guess you deserved it somehow. Yes, I know, which is why I didn't reject it. But now I want to craft another identity for myself. One with my own hands and hard work. And what do you plan on doing then? To get enough money to get your own house and your own identity? Void asked, and without hesitation Ryuk replied. I plan on becoming an adventurer. An adventurer? What's that? Void asked confusedly, and Ryuk explained. On Endearth, there are gates that appear and lead to dangerous alien races. Just like how the portals open up and the nulls come out, except that the gates are less chaotic than the nulls with a clear grade in strength. And unlike the null portals, where the nulls come rushing in, the gates don't churn out alien threats immediately. Takes time. And when a gate isn't attended to for long, that might happen. So the world needs people who will venture into these gates and clear them of the alien groups before they rush out. These people are called adventurers. Sounds like a risky job? Void asked, and Ryuk nodded. Yeah, it is. Most adventurers are at the Cataclysm stage. Finding one below that is rare. So yeah, it's only for the strong of the strong, and even then, I heard it has an insane amount of casualties. But it pays big money. It's perfect if I don't want to spend years hustling to gather up money. Adventurers are respected too, as it is more than just a job. I can get the money faster, and if I'm asked for my identity, I can simply show my adventurer card. Now that will be something I truly worked for, Ryuk said, as Void nodded his head before turning toward the distance. So, where are we heading then? He asked, as Ryuk pressed his hands on Ishel's back and whispered. We're heading for Grade A, Interdimensional Gates headquarters. The voice echoed in Isha's thoughts, as she took a sudden sharp swerve to the left before shooting forward with speed. Will take 5 hours? Isha's words rang in Ryuk's head. He nodded. Now, within those 5 hours, I need to change my face? He muttered aloud, as Void turned to look at him, watching Ryuk clench his horns. I don't think you need to change your face. Just get rid of the horns. People will only recognize you if you had the horns on, since they'll remember it from the footage. Definitely the horns. Even if you have a similar face, they'll be willing to ignore it so long as they don't see the horns. That makes sense. And how do you suggest we get rid of the horns? Ryuk asked. But then he watched as Void raised up its tiny paw, and then the sound of the air getting sharply sliced echoed as 5 of a meter-tall curved sickle emerged out of Void's paws, brimming with powerful Void runes. He stared back at Ryuk. "You up?" he asked, and Ryuk shook his head. "No way in hell I'm allowing you to sever off my horns." "What? It's a walkable path," Void said, grinning sadistically. "And how do you manage to grow a meter-long claw from that tiny palm?" Ryuk asked with a bit of horror as Void shrugged, the huge claw shrinking back into its palm. "Previously, I would have to turn my entire body into a large size before I could use those claws, but now I've changed a bit. I can grow a part of me without needing to go into a full transformation," Void explained, as Ryuk looked at it with knitted eyebrows. "And you seem to prefer the small size of you?" he asked as it nodded. "Yeah, it's easier to move around in, and getting into a big size drains mana. Not worth it, unless, of course, I'm thrown into a fight," Void responded as Ryuk nodded. "Maybe I should get a mask to hide or alter my face. But then, I don't think it will hide the horns too or remove them. Besides, if I'm putting on a mask, the Adventurer Guild would need me to uncover for the sake of an ID. That'll just lead to a lot of headache," Ryuk mused under his breath. But suddenly Void said, "Why don't you just reel it in?" he asked, as Ryuk's eyes flashed. "What?" Void walked forward, and his paw grabbed at Ryuk's hand, holding it out before him, before he ordered Ryuk. "Morph your hand into a claw." He said it, and in the next instant Ryuk's hand morphed, elongating and jointing, the flesh becoming that of a beast. Before it formed a claw, and even sharp steel-like nails grew out. Their mere flicker sliced open the air. "Return back to normal hands," Void ordered, and Ryuk's hand retracted in, becoming his normal hand once more. And then, Void dropped his hands as he climbed up Ryuk's face and ordered, "Draw back your horns." My horns aren't my hands, dummy. I can't move them. Just shut up and move it in, goof. How can you say you can't draw them back when you've never tried before?" Void said, as Ryuk's eyebrow twitched. "Now just close your eyes and move your horns in. Now," Void ordered seriously, and Ryuk inhaled as his expression regained focus. His eyes closed, and with a will, he tried to focus on the nanites that were around the sides of his forehead. When he focused on it, he was surprised to see that there was actually a long, open space in his head, just at the upper part of his brain, that was actually empty, as if something was meant to exist there. And when Ryuk focused on the anchors that connected his horns, with a simple will, he felt the horns dripping back into the open space in his head. And when he felt Void jump off his head, he opened his eyes to the sight of Void nodding. "Done?" Void said curtly, as Ryuk took his hands to the sides of his head, and he was more than shocked when he felt it as smooth as glass. "I really can curl them back in. There's even a space to curl them in," Ryuk mused, chuckling. His horns weren't gone, rather sent back into his head. Closing his eyes once more, he focused on the horns, which now filled the space, and with will, they stuck out once more as Ryuk opened his eyes, touching his head to find the horns there again. And once more, he closed his eyes and curled the horns back to the space before he opened his eyes and felt his face feeling the smoothness once more. "I've gotten rid of the horns. Good. Now all I need is reaching the interdimensional gates and getting started on the test." It said that your name is Ryuk." "Yes. Please, we need the full name for you to be allowed to take the test." The man, a middle-aged, averagely handsome, white-skinned man with short brown hair, called out to Ryuk while sitting behind a desk, his hands rapidly clicking on the keyboard. "Ryuk Null. That's the full name?" Ryuk replied, standing behind the counter, a dark cat licking its paw on his shoulder. "Ryuk Null?" the man asked, as he turned his gaze away from the monitor to give Ryuk a hard stare. Ryuk could only smile wryly as he scratched the back of his head. "Seems like your parents have quite the special naming skills," the man said, turning back to the monitor as Ryuk shrugged. I'm sure they must have their reasons. Ryuk, null. And that is established, he said, as he took a stamp and slammed it on a card-like plastic paper before he passed it to Ryuk. Get into that elevator. It will automatically take you to the waiting queue for you to take the test. If you pass, you'll be given a return slip with your rank on it, and I'll help print it out. Then we can proceed with things from there, he said, as Ryuk gave a nod before coming out of the queue, heading towards the elevator. When he entered, there was no keypad to allow him to input the floor he needed to go to, revealing that it was already established. He therefore didn't bother to make any move as he watched the elevator close up with a die-eyeing before he felt himself getting whisked upwards. You know, you have quite the slick mouth to get all those ladies to make you skip through many queues and quickly arrive here, Void said from the top of Ryuk's shoulder, who grinned with pride. Handsomeness is an art too, Void. A good advantage, especially in situations like this. Ryuk answered. They had arrived here just in 4 hours and 30 minutes, and Isha had opted to go back to the pet world. Bringing a human girl covered in frosty scales would have been suspicious, so he agreed to it. But Void was tiny, so it could remain on Ryuk's shoulder with no problem. So far it didn't open its mouth. They had met a lot of queues, but with Ryuk's handsomeness, he had been quickly picked up by the officials, especially the female ones, and had arrived here quite quickly in just about 30 minutes or so of arriving. Putting some stats in charisma finally starting to show its effect. Ryuk thought to himself, and then, the sound of the elevator doors opening up rang out as he stepped into a room filtered in white lights. There were a couple of staff sitting down with hovering holograms at the right, and to the left side was a seat where various other people, men and women, sat down. Ryuk's eyes faintly scanned ahead as he found the same card in his hand, but just before he could move towards the seat, he felt a gaze on him. He turned his head to find a staff waving at him. He walked towards her, as she eyed him for about 5 seconds, before shaking her head, seemingly clearing, snapping herself out of it, before she stretched her hands to Ryuk. Your pre-identification card, please? She asked, and Ryuk passed her the card as she placed it on a device at the side. A little whirring from the device, and the card was pushed out, with the lady taking it and passing it to Ryuk. You'll be number 7 to head in just about 7 minutes from now. Please have your seat while you await your turn. Thank you, Ryuk replied with a small polite smile before he turned to where the others were seated and resumed walking. Oh my God, the lady said when Ryuk got farther, as a head stuck out from the side. Wow, he's really tall. And hot. What's his name again? The other lady, a green-haired and green-eyed elf, asked, as the first lady turned to her screen. It says, Ryuk, null? She asked as their eyes twitched. Nope. Never heard of it before. Perhaps some family's rebellious young master who changed his own surname? The green-haired elf asked, staring at Ryuk until he took his seat. Both of the ladies immediately averted their gaze and focused on their devices. Hello. Ryuk greeted the gray-haired man who sat closest to him as he took his seat, and the man turned to look at him, smiling softly. Hello, young man. Feeling a bit nervous from the test? The man asked with a chuckle. The man was tall too, about 2.5 meters, making both him and Ryuk quite eye-catching due to their height. One sight, and Ryuk could immediately see that he was a titan. Although he held a kind smile, his eyes flickered with a great amount of experience, unlike most titans, who always had that fiery, battle-hungry look on their faces, which they tried their best to hold down with an emotionless expression. A bit, he replied as the man nodded. That's normal. Many here are like you too. Although I would argue that they're more worried about getting a low grading than the test itself, he replied. Ryuk turned his gaze to the others sitting to the left, and true to the man's words, they were visibly nervous, by their tapping feet, rubbing hands or folding them tightly, while some rocked forward and backward. The only clear exception was the titan by his side. You don't look nervous at all, though. Do you not care for the rankings? He asked the man, who chuckled softly. I do, but I'm already used to the pressures from my previous work. Makes it better to hide my nervousness. And if I don't get a high rank, I can always try to reach for that in the manual way. You know, completing more missions and closing more gates to rank up and all. That might take more time though, he said to Ryuk, who nodded his head before replying. I hope you get a high grading on the test, he said to the man, who smiled before replying. Yes, you too. Batch number 3A, number 5. Please proceed to the test door. The words sounded out as Ryuk watched the man rise up. Seems like it's my turn, he said, as Ryuk waved him goodbye, watching as he disappeared through the door. When the man left, the room regained its silence as Ryuk leaned on the chair, choosing to shut his eyes. Time passed pretty swiftly, and he occasionally heard the sound of names being called, but not people exiting, though. After about 6 minutes of waiting, he finally got the call. Batch number 3A, number 7. Please proceed to the test door. Without wasting a second more, Ryuk rose to his feet and walked toward the door, whose knob suddenly twisted by itself and then opened up as if carried by some mysterious force, as Ryuk stepped into the door and it shut itself close behind him. Telekinesis! The words echoed in the minds of everyone who was present in the room as they watched the door shut close by itself, the knobs returning to normal. When Ryuk stepped through the door, he could immediately feel it, the sense of stepping through a teleporter, and his eyes flashed when he found himself in a blank white dimension. It extended as far as his eyes could see, a blank white with no stain, but just about 10 meters away was a white office table with a white notepad, and sitting behind the desk was a white office chair where sat a chubby man who wore spectacles. Ryuk Null, I presume. Please come forward and stand in the runic circle, the man said without raising his gaze, as Ryuk walked forward to stand in a circle covered by green runic lines just 5 meters away from the man. So, you're here to take the adventurer test? He asked as Void, who was sitting on Ryuk's shoulder, twitched its eye from the man's dumb question. But Ryuk replied still, Yes, I am. You have successfully passed the first test. You will now be sent to the next, the man said, resulting in Void's eyes widening to saucers, and immediately, green dots of light flared out from the runic lines around Ryuk's feet, and he disappeared into thin air. Send in the next person? The chubby man said, never raising his gaze to look at Ryuk throughout the entire ordeal. The teleportation was fast, and in a blink, Ryuk was before another blank white room. At its center, just a few meters away from Ryuk, was a huge ball, and standing behind it was a female who had a holograph floating before her. Ryuk Null, I presume. What class did you belong, please? She asked, as Ryuk's eyebrow furrowed, and he replied, Class. That is to say, are you a conjurer, the most common class of which is elementalists, or an enhancer, which is the use of apex energy to improve bodily abilities? Or are you an emitter, most common of which are healers? I'm a conjurer, Ryuk replied as the lady tapped her hand swiftly on the holograph before ordering, Please place your hands on the glass ball for your element to be assessed, and your cultivation rank. The woman said, and Ryuk stretched out his right hand as he placed it on the floating glass ball. Immediately, a ton of silvery lights bloomed in it, as Ryuk felt a bizarre force snaking through his body and heading for his veins. But he acted instinctively, sinking his void veins into his nanobones, leaving just the frost veins out. The energy meandered through the frost veins, and Ryuk watched as the light from the ball began shining brighter and brighter until it reached a blinding level where it could no longer be observed. Your element has been assessed to be Ice Elementalist at a cultivation stage of the initial plane of Cataclysm. The woman called out loudly, typing on the holograph as Ryuk replied, That is correct. Good. You have passed the second test. Head to the next, she said, and like an automatic command, a wave of green light immediately shone beneath Ryuk's feet, and once more, he blinked out of existence, disappearing away from the room. This time, when Ryuk opened his eyes, it wasn't in a white room, but instead a seemingly endless grass plain. And when he looked to the left, he found a middle-aged man standing there with a notepad and pen in hand. He turned to Ryuk. This is the final assessment, Ryuk Null. You are to complete the stages in an allotted time of 30 minutes. The more stages you can progress through, the higher your adventurer ranking will be. Failure of stages, either by getting wounded enough to be tagged as killed by the system, will give you an adventurer rank that should be the previous stage. Or by failing to complete within the time frame, which will also mean you have failed and will be tagged with the rank below. Since you're at the Cataclysm stage, you will begin with the D-rank adventurer test, the man said, and in the next instant, Ryuk watched as the green grass morphed into a primitive-looking cave ground, with deep darkness in front. The man remained in the same place behind him, but there was a sleek and gorgeous glint coming in and out of him, occasionally making him resemble a holograph. The first test has begun. And do not worry, the beasts are but holographs, like you may have realized. They can't do real damage, although every damage is being assessed by the system, the man explained, as Ryuk's eyes flashed before he turned to the darkness in the cave. That was when he began hearing the sound of the floor getting scratched by heavy nails and deep, beastly growls. And walking out from the darkness were beastly wolf-like creatures, set with sharp bones jutting out from their joints, and mostly concentrated around their spines. There were a total of 5, and they walked forward toward Ryuk, flashing him a menacing growl. Interesting. 5 beasts at the peak of the Dominion stage. That's what must be faced before one can be tagged a C-ranked adventurer? I guess we'll be ranking quite high.